who should I talk to? And, and there's different kinds, herbalists and, different kinds.
Right.
So I want to talk about a little bit about that, but I'm trying to encourage people to really take the time to speak to recreate that connection, especially for our children that have special requirements and special needs, because they're struggling as well, and it's the perfect thing to do. So it's so I'll hand it back to you, Patricia, and then I'll turn my mute on, and then we'll start.
All right. Bonjour, Kenoya. Good morning. I want to start off our session in a good way, and welcome to the, pardon me, my screen is moving and jumping all over. So my name is Patricia McGiskin. I'm a special education support technician with the Chiefs of Ontario, and I'd like to welcome you to Decolonizing Education Workshop Series, Module number 3, Indigenizing Education, Elders in the Land, Flex Learning, and Lifting Community Morale, Excellence and Pride. So today I'm actually at Manitoulin Island, and I want to do the land acknowledgement. So we're in the territory of the Anishinaabe and the Odawa people, and it's important to know that the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Odawa people, recognized by the Manitoulin Two Treaties 45 and 94, and sometimes also known as the Bond Head Treaty. The island, oh my goodness, the drive in here was just beautiful, incredible. The island is the ancestral home of 6 Anishinaabe nations, including Wikwemikong. There is also Chigin, Chigwinda, Sheshagawani, Ondek Onnekoning, and Giabazing. And again, identified in our previous session, we know that the Chiefs of Ontario is located on the traditional nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and now many, many diverse First Nations, Inuit Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto was covered by Treaty number 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. So our module again will run for 2 hours from 10 a.m. to 12. The presentation will be completed first with a Q&A afterwards. So if you have any questions or comments, use the chat within the Zoom, and we'll get to those questions as we move along. The microphones will be muted in the interest of our timeline. There will also be an evaluation. So what I'm going to do is send another email with that evaluation link. I would also like to identify our subject content may cause a negative or personal or emotional experience. And if this happens, please reach out to family, a trusted confidant, a local elder. Again, the Hope for Wellness helpline is available. And that helpline toll-free number 1-855-242-3310, and again www.hopeforwellness.ca. So our speaker series is again Dr. Cynthia Wesley Esquamo, who originates from the Chippewas Georgina Island First Nation. She is also, pardon me, she is also the chair for the Truth and Reconciliation at the Lakehead University. Before I get to the presentation, or Cynthia, I'd like to introduce our elder for today, and her name is Dr. Jeanette Corbier-Lavelle, who originates also from Wikwemikong. She holds 3 honorary doctorate degrees offered through the York University, Trent University, Nipissing First Nation. She's also a holder of the Order of Canada. So help me with the opening ceremonies. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Patricia. Ani, bonjour, Kenoya. Iwed nang dishnikas nishnabe kwendal, Migo mampi enjia, the domnising nikadek, kadek know that. Before I get into the actual prayer, I just introduced myself in our Anishinaabe language, and my Anishinaabe name is North Star, given to me many, many years ago, and I'm just so pleased that this happened because it was about 60 years ago, and now I realize the significance of being given that name. But miigwech to Patricia and to all of you for giving me an opportunity to offer a prayer this morning for a good workshop and to give thanks to the Creator. How Jemnado Shashungi Kitsa Ishnikasia, he would not Ishnika. Miigwechenda Mino Mandakisha Kawam Dama. Miigwechke Ixkusiam, we wam the Mang Mandakishka. Weakness Abjungitchen and Albert Mandakishka Debnama. Miigwechke Kinige Ugatoi Mampi King Wanakasia. Kinige Ugananjo. Ngwikshitonados Eshkiosiam. We knock the way Mount the Muslim Gamish. Nebeke Memdige Numbermanda in Scotland, Nebe Patina. Up just Manda Nishim. We can't me, we knocked the way to me. Kaigatashkitosina, we might say, Manda. Me was this nicotine. Skodega update. We need a chanda. No, then me no Manda. Okay. Can the Manda Kimi was me? Kitchen and down with us. Beneshi, the bumbus check. Gay no one, me a watch, Demisha. Ego can be shing a yajic. Me watch Demisha. Ego. Me no little sense of me good a yajic. Gay no action. 10,000 boogie one. Me watch and I'm at Scalia. With the echo partner. To gain no Agiava on the Batino. It was the stick. Go knock the window on the Schmanda. Ni Johnson on it or say. Uncle Jignac, we know Gava one and Wabia chick kendamo at gay no as you can argue Mandam. Mishom Senanik, no Miss Nanik to them. You are Chendam and me no Mandakisha come up. To send me on gay in one. We not emotional, chick skills, yeah. Longer Mandakisha. We know the mouth. We can the mouth. Ani as you can know going them. Chinakazi Amdishman. Midashnumbur. Miwachen men, Minomandalish. Migwash Dashniket. Migwach. I don't know if you want me to give it in English or not. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just briefly then. I've been taught that by my elders that it is always good to start each day with a prayer. And the first thing when you open your eyes is to give thanks to the Creator that we can open our eyes and see our world around us and that we are breathing. We can breathe in the fresh air and be able to put our feet on the ground and to take in that air, as I said. And especially when we look around at water, we are so gifted. We have this special gift that the Creator gave us because water is so important. And especially now in the spring, when we see the waters coming back after the winter of ice and snow. And we will do whatever we can to ensure that the water is clean and safe for all living people and creatures are on this account, that we say. Giving thanks to all the birds in the air, the fish in the waters, the little animals, the little creatures that live in the earth, and all the wild animals in the forest and the domestic ones, because they are all part of our environment, and we give thanks for that. We're asking our ancestors, our grandfathers, grandmothers, and our guardians to help us today to listen well, to hear, and to learn, take into ourselves what we are being given today. So mainly that was the overall prayer that I've been taught we should do every day, along with as much as it's available. So it just helps to clear the energies around us and to start up in a good and positive way and practice those teachings of the seven grandfathers. Miigwech.
Beautiful, miigwech, miigwech, Jeanette. Okay, so Cynthia, you're on.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Elder Jeanette, for that, because it does remind us very much that we have a lot to be grateful for. And as we watch the world being challenged by all of the pollutants and all the things that are going on, we have a responsibility as Indigenous peoples to be very careful and to be very caring about the planet and everything that's happening. So thank you so much for reminding us. And I agree with you that a prayer in the morning helps focus us for the day. And every day is an important day. So for those of you that are just joining us that have not been a part of the other webinars, I want to just go briefly through what we're doing here. As Patricia said, my name is Cynthia Wesley Askama. I'm coming to you from the Chippewas or Georgina Island today. I'm actually on the reserve. I've been living here for the last couple of weeks now and plan to be here all summer, I hope. So that's really important to me. I am the chair for Truth and Reconciliation at Lakehead. I'm also the chair of the governing circle for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Much of my work over the course of time has been actively engaged in these kinds of conversations across the country. You know, we're trying very hard to teach everyone we possibly can about the Truth and Reconciliation movement and also what's happening in our own communities. There's this larger reconciliation movement that is happening through government and other kinds of institutions, but there's a lot going on in our own communities that is about reconciliation as well, and is also about truth. So as Patricia said, some things might be said that might be a little bit challenging for you because there's a lot going on in our communities that is wonderful, but there's also some very big challenges with our young people. And this conversation today is really about elders and the kinds of elders that are available to us in our communities, and how can we reconnect ourselves and reconnect our children with the seniors and the elders in our communities, because they really need them right now. So I'm going to just see if I can share my screen. I'm going to start with a couple just slides to get the conversation going. And then as we move forward, I'll as you know, I'll take those down and I'll move back and forth between them, because I think that that's just the best way to do it. Let me just move myself out of here. So this is webinar 3. This is a really important part of the conversation, and we've got one more to go, but we're moving through. I'm going to put this slide up because I just want you to have a look at it while I talk about the kinds of things that have happened over the course of time to break down the individuals and families and communities and nations across time. This is a sort of a short timeline that gives you a little bit of information about the kinds of things that have been happening to us over the course of time. We know that there's been a lot of history that's gone under the bridge. We know that we're currently involved in a lot of different kinds of conversations that are going to have been harmful to us over the course of time. So I'm really interested in actually having you think about, for those of you that have not had an opportunity to really do the in-depth learning that's necessary to understand what's happening, to start thinking about how far does the harms that we've experienced and harms that we're continuing to experience go back? And I would say, frankly, that it goes all the way back to contact and everything that's happened in between. So we have this sort of resonance that's continuing to affect our communities across the country. And we really need to be cognizant of that. It's not about what's wrong with you. It's what happened to you. that we have to remember to ask people as we move forward. And the numbers at the end here, 2016, if we were carrying it forward, we're now at 54.2% of kids in foster care of our children, and it's going up. It's not going down, and the incarceration rates are also going up significantly. So I want you to try to be aware of that as we go through this conversation. And we have so many resources available to us in our communities through the people that have lived through some of these experiences and really want to share with you their knowledge, their experience, so that we don't have to repeat some of the tragic things that have happened across time. So the first thing I want to do before we move into the actual conversation today, I just wanted to share that with you, is I want to talk a little bit about where we've been so that we have a sense of that as we move forward. In webinar 1, we talked about the TRC calls to action and the guiding principles, also the principles put forward by presidents of universities, because there's a lot of people that are actively engaged in this conversation. We reviewed the 7 calls to action on education that are very specific to education for what we're trying to do and what we need to know about. In webinar 2, we talked about a discussion on deconstructing and refining what the special in special education means to our communities, and to provide some observations on the importance of opening that dialogue at the community level based on our own truths and our own internal reconciliation processes, the stuff that we're doing as individuals, as family members, as community members, and as nation members to try to correct some of the circumstances that have been part of the challenges that we're experiencing. Wise practices recognize that Indigenous peoples in Canada are reconstructing and rejuvenating cultures, languages, and economies after a period of colonization and loss. And that discussion centered on how to meet our need to revise approaches to special or extraordinary children, or what I would rather refer to as our diverse learners. Rather than calling them special needs, I like to call them diverse learners, because they are learners and they are doing a lot of different kinds of things, and how we can rename and reframe how they perceive themselves and how they're perceived by other people, especially in the classrooms. We want our children to have every opportunity to thrive in every single educational system that they actually encounter, and we want them to know what they're learning has value, and that they're going to take that education into other places that are going to be beneficial to our nations. We're building strong and healthy communities, sustainable economic development, nation building. That's what we're doing. And as I've talked to different people and had done different keynotes to the Chiefs of Ontario and the Anishinaabe Nation, we're talking about nation building. We're re-examining our own ways and determining the traditionally based and the best wise practice pathways forward. That's our job. It's not the government's job. It's not somebody from an external source's job. It's our job to do that work. We're trying to describe the mechanisms and knowledge mobilized by our leadership, our members, to deflect interference by the Canadian state. We have waited 500 years for the Canadian state to take action, and they haven't done it to our satisfaction as yet. They're not going to. This is really up to us. And this question of best practices simply means accessing deeply embedded Indigenous knowledges as the main source of inspiration and change over standardized Western models and ideology. That's not where we're going. So those webinars are about prompting the reconstitution of Indigenous education. What was it prior to the attempt to kill the Indian in the child? What were we doing to actually ensure that our children were prepared to move forward in a good way, that they had the tools they needed to do the work they needed and to create the relationships and to create the nation building that was required for us to move forward? Formal, missionary, and Eurocentric education was imposed on our ancestors through the experience. And through that experience, this question of special education that we now live with came through, because that's what Canada wanted. We've had different opportunities to work with our own children in our own communities, and it has not been through a lens that sees them in deficit. It's always been a lens that sees them as members of our communities who play a role and have a place. But Canada didn't see us that way, so we've tried to change that structure to accommodate what we want now. So we need to push forward to something more practical and inclusive inclusive of our very special children, our diverse learners, our exceptional children. Doing this also means opening up some very sensitive and challenging conversations. And this is the part where we're saying that sometimes we have to say things that may not be easily understood or easily owned, because there's been some challenges within the confines of our own communities. It means speaking into internal concerns such as the impact of residential schools, child welfare, sexual and physical violences, and asking everyone to become a part of this very difficult conversation and understand and accept that no one can do this alone. You know, we had that conversation a little bit last week. No one can do this alone. It really is going to take absolutely everybody. We need our elders, we need our mothers, we need our fathers, many of the men who have been pushed out of the circle because of circumstances that they had really no control over. And we need to speak into the truth and why it's essential to do the inner work and healing for our communities ourselves. So the webinar today is called Indigenizing Education, Elders in the Land, Flex Learning Community, Lifting Community Morale. My grandfather, Lorenzo Big Canoe, when he was part of the 1951 Indian Act revisions, said that very clearly and unequivocally to government when they said, we're going to give you governance, we're going to give you self-government, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that. And he said, you can't give us anything because those are already inherently ours. But he said, what we really need to do is we need to lift the morale of the people. And until we lift the morale of the people, we're not going anywhere. So, you know, that's, you know, you need to do what you need to do. We need to do what we need to do. So this webinar is going to be asking, you know, what community-driven education, teaching, and learning means to each of you. Now, I know I can't be in each of your circles wherever you are, but I want you to have that conversation. And I want you to have that conversation with people that are actually engaged in the schools as well. We need to talk about the value of elders and what is flex strength-based wise practices in learning. What does that mean? It means that we have to step outside the classroom at every opportunity, because kids in our communities don't necessarily learn well sitting row on row on row, desk by desk, and having somebody tell them what they need to know. What we really need to do with education is we need to draw out of the children what they already know, what they came in with, their gifts, and we need to lift those gifts for them. So we also understand that we need to look back 7 generations and affirm our responsibility to look forward 7 generations. But we not only want to reference, but utilize the 7 teachings as well in everything that we do and in the planning that we're making. So I will be referencing those as well. We want to address the challenges of bringing parents, caregivers, and grandparents, elders, and other important adults into the classroom. And I know that is a big challenge. I have been in a remote community. I have taught in a remote community at various grades, and I know how difficult it was to get elders and people into the classrooms. But we have to work on that, because I think our kids seeing them there will be a part of the actual shift that we're trying to make in our schools. So today also we have a guest speaker, Stephen Copty, who has a MSW, Master's of Social Work, and is now working in 2 different flying communities, will be joining us. I'm going to speak to you, and then he's going to speak to you, and then I'm going to close it off. And then finally, on May 17th, we're going to close with webinar 4, which will be facilitating circles of learning that includes truth and restoration of educational jurisdictions, authority, and rights through reconciliation. And we have a lot of communities across Ontario that have actually implemented laws around education. And so we need to have something on that. We need to come down hard on the question of reconciliation through recognition of our children and what we know they need as we nation build. So it's good. Webinar 4 will be asking everyone to participate in critically defining the purpose of education for our children from an Indigenous perspective. And I have asked that question over the years when people talk about education. I've said, what are you educating your children for? Are you educating them so that they will leave the community and they will become lawyers or corporate people or bankers? Or are you educating your children so that they will stay within the confines of the nation and actually build the nation? And if so, how are you going to do that? Because we need to promote the kind of learning that's going to be important for them and for us, and so that they don't leave and they don't go somewhere else, because that is really that whole question of what's the word that they use? We're moving our kids away. So those are really important considerations as well. And then we need to access and assess how many of the school boards that we have in our communities are actually run by us. and not by other people exterior to our community. We don't want to, assimilation is the word I was looking for. So that's important. And then clarifying the roles and responsibilities as we continue to move forward to full reclamation of Indigenous languages, cultures, education, governance systems, and instituting training for our members to run their own school boards, curriculum, and learning for the future. So we've all stated that every child matters. We're now asking ourselves and each other, what matters to every child as we move forward? And what does community-driven education, teaching, and learning actually mean? So those are the webinars that we've been actually tasked to look at. And then just the whole question of shifting pedagogies. These are the things that we've started to think about. How do we shift the learning mechanisms, the tools, and the experiences in our classrooms for our children, so we know what they're doing and where they're going, and they're doing what we want them to do to stay within the confines of our nations. So that's the kind of where we're sort of starting our process as we move forward and into our conversation. So I'm going to speak for a little while, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve. Steve's going to talk a little bit about what's happening in his world, and then I'm going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more, and then from there, we're going to do a Q&A for as long as necessary. And if Pat decides we need a break, we'll take a break in between. So we'll leave it at that. So what does all this mean? It means reigniting the passion for learning in everyone in our community. And I mean everyone. I do not leave one door unknocked upon. Indigenous peoples are nation building across the entire country. So are we. Some are more further ahead than others. They're rebuilding internal capacity in other areas, and some are just finding their way. And I know we listen sometimes to the news and we hear them talk about some of the challenges that our First Nation communities, Métis communities, and Inuit communities are experiencing. So even though it's 2023, we still really haven't got to that place where we can confidently say that we're well on our way. We're still just trying to, and it's not only us. We're not the only ones. I mean, there's other people that are struggling with addictions and sexual violences and domestic violences as well. But we want to work on our nations, and maybe we can be the image that other people will follow. I mean, that's what the prophecies tell us. So we've chosen to look deeply at the question of education, and after examining the 7 calls to action, we're sending out our own call to action to ensure our extraordinary children are recognized and taught in unique ways that represent the diverse learners that they are. So it means a return to the original instructions and recognition that much of this knowledge has to be reconstituted and brought forward for youth and members of every community. It means acknowledging that we've been, sometimes we've had to refer to sleeping elders and community members who've chosen not to share their knowledge because of resignation, religion, or because they don't feel heard. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we listening? It means canvassing the entire community and the nation for ways to bring people back together for this very sensitive, important work. I remember, I think his name is Johnson, one of the Indigenous authors, said, you know what, when people are drinking in a community, you can't just talk to the people that are not drinking about how to stop people from drinking. You have to talk to the drinkers too. Everybody has to be brought into the circle, and everybody has to understand that they are a part of actually correcting the things that need to be corrected. So it can't be done by a few people, no matter how dedicated we are. It has to be done by the many with serious intention, necessary time allocations, tears, outrage, and when appropriate, a good measure of humor, because humor, as we know, is the best medicine. We all know how much division, anger, hurt, and fear has been generated over the past 500 years. Now it's time to address it, teach it, mourn it, and get our future back on track with all the beauty and traditional knowledges that are truly ours to live and gift to our children. So I've included a couple things for you to read. The Circle of Security Intervention, enhancing attachment in early parent-child relationships. I think it's really important that we go back, and this is where our elders come in handy as well, because they know this stuff, back to actually understanding what are the stages of childhood, so that we can actually bring back in those things called rites of passage. And how do we reconstitute and understand who our children are? There's some news articles, elder stories, from the past brought back to life, things that we need to understand. If you don't have immediate access to an elder, put up a prayer, because when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I want to open a session with a video on approaches to working in an Indigenous community. It's an Australian video, but they have many of the same challenges as we do in the Northern Territories. And I think it's a good video for us to watch. I'm going to see if I can actually bring it up here. And you'll let me know if it doesn't work, you know, it's there, the piece is there for you to actually take a look at it. So let's see if I can bring it up here and if it'll work. Can you see our screen?
Friendly reminder to share your audio before you share your screen, right?
Okay, hold on. So I have to share my
Audio.
oh yeah, I think I got, let me just see if I did that. Yeah, it's share sound.
Okay, you're good.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if we can make it go. Let's see. Can you hear it?
I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of this country, the Turrbal people, and also those traditional owners in Lockhart River. In 2002, I found myself on a very small 10-seater plane flying to the remote community of Lockhart River in Cape York. I was Executive Director, Leadership and Culture in my State Department of Education. I was part of a small government envoy determined to make a contribution to closing the gap of significant disadvantage in Aboriginal communities and to get better results from the government investment. We'd done our initial assessment in our offices in the capital, and we were flying in to meet with community leaders. We would then fly out again, develop plans, get the right people, implement them. This is the typical white Australian way of helping remote Indigenous communities. In a fly-in, fly-out solution model, it's usually outside experts who decide what needs to be addressed and how it's going to be addressed and when it's going to be implemented, and they fly in and out of a community. I thought I was well prepared, but when we landed in the community, I was absolutely shocked by the startling poverty and disadvantage that I witnessed. I could not believe that this was Australia, my country, in the 21st century. How could this have been allowed to happen? Community leaders weren't particularly interested in talking with us. We could have seen this as rude or just ungrateful, but clearly we didn't have the local knowledge or cultural competence to do what was needed. It was very tough going. We were out of our comfort zone, but a few things became strikingly clear. The idea that we could sit in our air-conditioned city offices and develop plans to address the issues in a remote Indigenous community were crazy. The idea that local leaders didn't know or care about the challenges facing their community was arrogant. The idea that they would trust us when we walk in and say we're from the government, when in their living memory they have been disenfranchised, dislocated, forced into servitude. They've had their children stolen and their wages stolen. They've been punished for practicing their own culture and speaking their own language. They are the inhabitants, this is their country for 50,000 years, and yet today they have no right to own land in their own community. The government has been the perpetrator or complicit in many of these initiatives. And so for us to walk in and say, we're from the government, trust us, is absolutely ludicrous. And then there's the idea that the challenges in remote Indigenous communities can be addressed without long-term, sincere, authentic engagement and working closely with the local community is simply wrong. So what is the result of this fly-in, fly-out solution model? the community ends up more disempowered. It's not their ideas, their issues, or their solutions. Often the wrong projects are implemented and they fail because they're not community-led. Often this failure is then blamed on the communities and used as an excuse not to reinvest. The end result of this is that the issues and the challenges of remote Indigenous communities are put in the too hard basket. I was initially a fly-in, fly-out worker. After developing relationships with community leaders, they asked me to go and help them do some planning and to stay in the community, live there for a couple of months. I agreed. I ended up staying and living there for 5.5 years that time. I was inspired by the people of Lockhart River because despite generations of adversity and their current unbelievable hardship, I could see determination, strength and pride. Determination to secure a better future for their coming generations. Strength to carry on despite so many young deaths and a suicide rate double the national average. And pride in themselves and their culture. I was determined to become part of the community, to build on their strengths and to work with them on their issues. And by that I mean the issues that they see as important and urgent. This is not a fly-in, fly-out way of working, building an authentic relationship. It doesn't happen in a couple of trips or a couple of hours or days. It takes months or years. I quit my job. I established the Puya Foundation. Puya means heart or life force in the local Kukiao language. In the foundation, we developed a totally new way of working with the community to get results called the Puya approach, turning many things on their head to the normal way of working with Aboriginal communities. As a charity, we work alongside the community, empowering and working with everyday leaders to help them shape and determine and create their own bright future. 2/3 of our board members are local community leaders. Our most recent endeavour, the establishment of the Kunchikakana Families Together Centre, is a great example of our people.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing there. I want you to actually see if you can finish. The reason I wanted to show you that is because I wanted you to see what people can actually do when given the opportunity to actually do the work on their own. So I didn't want it's only about 10 minutes, but I wanted you to see that there's ways to do this. And when she looked at the community, she understood that there was so much going on in the community that here we are bringing these people in, and maybe we need a little bit of help when it comes to planning. But our other reality is that it's already there. And we just need to bring it forward. So listening to our elders and bringing them and other knowledgeable adults, or even youth, because youth have so many great ideas, firmly into the circle of learning, even when the provincial or federal school objects, is essential. So we can establish places in every curriculum for land-based learning, cultural teachings, experiential and experimental teachings and learnings in remote, rural, and urban environments. But we have to ask, what do the elders need to do what they need to do, and when they're engaged in change making, how do we support them? When we answer those questions, we're delving into deeper concerns because we're asking our elders in this webinar to return to the circle of youth and children, even when they don't feel like it's possible. And I know I have elders in my own community that are in their late 80s. And when I've asked them if they would teach the language, they said no, because nobody's interested, or no, because they don't listen anyway. And it's like, please, try to get past that feeling and back into the circle so that we can actually do this work. So we're asking them to not only know and share their history, but how they've dealt with the trauma of their own lives and how to help others through their own story of healing. And again, it's, there are elders that have had some very significant things happen to them. Many of them were raised with Christian ethics, and some are blending that ethic with traditional and spiritual practices. And I think that's perfectly okay. We're not asking them to change themselves. We're asking them to help us work within the confines of the community. And we're not judging. We're accepting their life experiences, no matter which end of this spiritual spectrum they're on, and working with them through love and inclusion. What counts here is their willingness to work with the entire community and set standards for education for our youngest and special learners. And we're always curious as to their life experiences. Did they too experience adverse childhood experiences when they were young? And can we build that understanding into the education of our diverse learners, helping them and the elders we engage with as they go forward? Like just having those conversations, and they witness things that sometimes they don't really want to talk about, but I would really like to find a way. And I think we can all work towards that. As in Western education, there's many types of practitioners in the Indigenous world. So the following list was prepared by Sykes Powderface at the Banff Centre in Alberta. I worked with Sykes for many years at the Banff Centre. He was a resident elder at the center, and he sought to answer many of the questions asked about who an elder is and what they do. Now, he died in 2022, leaving a long legacy from his 88 years of participating in national politics and healing across Turtle Island. The following list represents what Elder Powderface identified as the kinds of elders that provide holistic teachings and care to Indigenous peoples and what's expected of them. And I'm including this list in his thoughts because I think it's from our, I think it's best coming from our elders, even if they've passed, that the wisdom to create a better world, it comes from them. And they had, he had some really interesting ideas about some of those conversations. He noted that elders are commonly requested to provide ceremonial and blessing activities like sweats, smudge, prayer. However, he also believed that having cultural and academic skills practices are now increasingly required to help with collaborative work on truth and reconciliation processes, program planning, community capacity building. So he said, elders who have qualifications and skills in relationship building, teaching, healing, mental health care, and experiences and practices in both the Indigenous and non-Indigenous world are now in more demand. So traditionally, a person is considered an elder or wise when they demonstrate a respectable and honorable personality and character. These are his words. They're the ones who exemplify what he called the 4 principles of the Creator's law: honesty, truth, respect, and honor. And they are considered gifted people, spiritually, emotionally, physically, orally. They're the role models to others. Elders are people that show leadership without favor and will act as a peacemaker, a counselor, a healer, a teacher, a helper, and one who shares with others without question. So the call is to go back to our traditional wise practices to see that elders and professionals in their own way with different skills, experience, gifts, and other levels of spiritual practice bring into this, it is a very important conversation of learning, especially with our children. And most of all, their character, their personality, their command of the language, posture, energy, outward appearances, they have to show qualities of being positive role models. In the modern world, scholars and with academic qualifications are distinct in their knowledge, skills, experiences, practices, and seniority, and could be specialists in one field. But some elders have more skills than others. Some have fewer skills in a variety of areas, maybe less experience, maybe less knowledge and gifts, while others have many, and some may have only one special area of knowledge and practice. So the following are what he called general definitions and examples of distinct qualifications used to categorize elders' work put forward by, as he was thinking about and the work that we were doing and the questions that people ask. And the diversity of culture and languages across culture means presentations, practices obviously vary within different nations, but they're commonly known and recognized activities by Indigenous people. So he talked about ceremonialists. Practice pipe ceremonies, sweats, and prayer for different ceremonies at different levels of need. Spiritual, health, healing, guidance, and protection are part of their work. And we quite often use ceremonialists at the Banff Centre. He also talked about pipe carriers. These elders are specialized in multiple areas, kind of like a minister, he said, that, and we do use pipe carriers quite often at the Banff Centre as well, in many of the work that we do. He talked about traditional teachers. They teach about the Creator and ways of nature, the values of life and living, and work with other elders to share a wide experience in knowledges and language, spiritual practices, skills, history, and even governance. Storytellers or orators use stories to teach, demonstrate, and illustrate learning. Very important and really a growing element in our communities as people start to come back to being comfortable with storytelling. I mean, I've had people say to me, I don't have any stories. I'm like, yes, you do. Everybody has a story. This is the one who talks about the past, about the history of the people, and knows sacred spaces and places by their original names. Talked about herbalists. They have knowledges of plants and herbs for food and medicine, health and wellness, practices on strong land-based knowledges. Talked about philosophers who understand specific cultural knowledge and practices like governance, hunting, history, genealogies, who share their knowledge to highlight the parallels of governance and the certification of worldviews, knowledges, and wisdoms. He also talked about healers or medicine people. These people treat sick people. They can diagnose illnesses, they prescribe treatments, and are highly knowledgeable about plants and herbs and other spiritually based treatments. I have had many experiences with healers and medicine people. They also have excellent land-based knowledges and teach about life and responsibilities before and after death. And I've had many people work with me from that particular area. Role models. People with good personalities, strong characters, positive outward appearances, they carry themselves well. They're always ready to help and share with others without being asked. They have knowledge of spiritual practices and share spiritual teachings about life, take responsibility for mentoring and supporting others. Talked about craftspeople. These are the makers of tools, weapons, household items, clothing, beadwork, ceremonial regalia, and they have knowledge of uses of raw materials. And then he talked about eminent scholars, well-known, respected. They're becoming the most common teachers that we have, certainly in academic institutions and other corporate centers, frequently experienced and knowledgeable about the academic and spiritual worlds and have wisdom to help others adapt in both. So many of those people are regarded as two-eyed seers. So that's another terminology that we sometimes use. And others have been added over the course of time. Now we're also speaking about knowledge keepers. And I hear that phrase more often than I ever heard it before. Knowledge keeper, traditional knowledge keeper, referring to someone who's been taught by an elder or a senior knowledge keeper within their community, maybe in other places. This person holds traditional knowledges, teachings. They've been taught how to care for those teachings, and when it is or is not appropriate to share this knowledge with others. So another kind of a person in our communities that we can call forward. And also cultural advisors, another form that's kind of coming up more often than not, another form of a teacher. They hold cultural knowledges that have been shared with them by more experienced teachers, elders, or knowledge keepers as well. And many times you find these cultural advisors in academic institutions, in corporate centers, and other places like that. So there's a lot of people kind of growing out of the educational experiences that we've been having as Indigenous peoples. And I think it's important that we sort of understand that not everybody is going to be the same and offer the same kind of knowledge, the same kinds of supports, but we have all of this huge array of people that we can come to and draw forward into our circles as we start to reform, I guess, our educational systems. So, elders like Sykes have shared how we can look and see the reason we call this continent Turtle Island. When asked what lays beneath the turtle, I've been told there's turtles all the way down. Lots of knowledge, long-standing traditional medicinal approaches that have always been available, reconstitution of an open relationship with Western mental health care providers would provide absolutely new avenues of staunching the increased rates of mental illness and addictions in our communities, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit across Canada. We have to start to understand that all of these assets we have, all these resources we have, need to be blended with the work that we need to do. The variety of Indigenous caregivers and healers provides a powerful spiritual lesson, and Turtles All the Way Down becomes an image for a layer upon layer of impact. Sometimes, as we've been besieged, and sometimes as we've just learned and know what we have and who we are. The layers upon layer possibilities is there as we navigate these difficult times. So this is about calling back our elders to create reconciliation between ourselves, and that we welcome the truth regarding everything that we do. We cannot strive for an indigenized process of learning and sharing without facing the need to reclaim practices that may have been set aside because of colonization and through the residential school years. We have to reintegrate learning and teaching from prior to conception, so before we even get pregnant, all the way through adulthood. And this means some very hard work in accepting our knowledge that we require a reassessment of where we are and where we're going as a nation. Where will we be 50 years from now, 100 years from now? Every child matters, but what matters to every child? when it comes to life, learning, and thriving? How do we apply a value-driven framework to our work together? And there's where we apply the 7 teachings to the action plans that we're developing. In the times of the restoration of good minds, good hearts, they're necessary in guiding us towards good intentions. This will require attaching compassion to each of the 7 grandfather teaching. Compassion was a necessary aspect of that vernacular, spoken in our own language. Tribal relationships to create culturally safe, generational codes of conduct and consideration for all of our relations. The colonial intent to destroy has left bitterness and hatred in our relationships, which have distorted the natural practice of the ways to live and have a good life without exploitation, ruthless competition, and predatory behaviors. Compassion provides diplomatic consideration of the power of knowing traditional values and how to function within the parameters of those 7 ways of being, seeing, and doing. The 7 grandfather teachings have encountered arrogance and ignorance and rejection of interdependency and reciprocity as the foundational mindset for right relations, but they still stand. Should we really be preoccupied with Indigenous identity associated with blood quantum rather than cultural quantum? So there's lots of conversations that we can't even get to here today about what's going on out there. Restoration and recovery requires careful but difficult journeys of self-discovery. Youth become confused by Indigenous culture practice without compassion and explanation for the severe disruption of colonial chaos on our nations. Young people must learn alongside other young adults about the stages of life our ancestors lived and taught, the courage, bravery to understand the challenge of relationship and marriage, so children have a solid foundation to be born into. Respect for self and other, because only we can address home environments and ensure they're a safe place for every child, because their happiness matters. We must have the humility to admit when we need help and the willingness to offer our support to the learning necessary for all communities members to care for every child, especially the extraordinary ones who need special attention and support. We must be honest with ourselves and each other about the challenges we are up against and agree to work together to reclaim the health and well-being of our entire community, nation, families, everything. There's more than one truth in every instance, and we must come to accept that we all bring something to the table, and differences are important to the development of indigenizing education systems and governance. These values bring us through to love. And this breaks the cycle of lateral violence in our organizations and relationships. We can work together, because if we are not working together, we are not working well. Finally, and the elders will be of key assistance here, we must rely on their wisdom and life experience to guide the process of actioning the purpose and role of truth and reconciliation in our own cultures, expectations, and in the implementation of our rights. Our teachings of diverse learners must restore the experience of the circle, with sustenance at the very center and reconstitution of food sovereignty on the land, teachings of medicines and tools to create what we need over land-based grocery stores, without the overabundance of stuff and things that we do not require to survive in a good way. Around the teachings of sustenance sit the children, each encouraged to express their uniqueness and abilities through the learning about and growing of foods and understandings. Around the children are the mothers brought into the learning circle and restored as the first teachers, the ones who set and then slowly expanded the boundaries of knowledge and safety. Mothers who are present, supported, and encouraged through the stages of pregnancy, fetal development, and toddlerhood, and on. Around the mothers, the elders of all genders, supporting, encouraging, providing respite care when necessary, and teaching the stories, the histories, the environment, and participating in the expanding of the growing, exploring, and learning environment for the child and the mothers. Around the elders, the fathers, re-loved back into the circle, tasked with keeping an internal view of the family and an external view of the environment in the world, protector, provider, and conduit to everything outside of the immediate circle. Also playmate and teacher to mother and to children, strong support to grandparents and elders. Children need to be nurtured from conception through adulthood. The love of a mother is imperative to positive mental health. The love of a father essential for the same reasons, different in expression, that's all. Positive mental health comes from love, play, gentle instruction, and kindness. Seeing parents engaged at work, play, and support for their different roles and responsibilities. Aunties and uncles are critical players in the nurturing and teaching of children as well. They bring in play, discipline, encouragement, and exploration. When it comes to formal education for our diverse learners, we look to making room in the school year and during all breaks for on-the-land teachings, creation stories, prophecies that can be understood by every child and every adult in the community. This is a community-wide knowledge exchange and is not just for children, because it is the adults and the elders who will endorse and continue to support traditional forms of instruction and open space for learning that includes all children, especially those with very special needs that include art, dance, song, and use of their hands and bodies when they're challenged by Western curriculum. And if culture lives in the language, then language instruction must be a critical component of our fight for the appropriate education for our children. So this story will be about renewing connection to the land, not only for food and acquisition, but for all knowledges. Tales of the weather, the birds, the songs, the stories, the songs of the winds, the waters, the stories and teachings of the animal families who remind us of how we once lived totally on the lands, free of white flour, white alcohol, and junk foods, drinks full of sugar, which kill our pancreas, livers, and create diabetes and other systemic disorders, and of course, rot our children's teeth. We've already had some very challenging conversations through these webinars and through the work we've been engaged in at home. We have been moving forward. Still, in the end, the question remains is how? How do we do this? How will we make the knowledges open, the forms of education we need happen, and who will be responsible, and how will we know when we're getting there? So the community as a whole must determine where there is. The endpoint to renaming, reframing special education for Indigenous diverse learners is ours alone. We do not, however, stand alone. We have only been made to believe that we must divide and fight each other for every inch we secure. We've been taught that our resources in particular, are too scarce. What changes will be required to ensure our children will grow up in an Indigenous process of truth and reconciliation that is truly reflective of who they are and where they're going, and is delivered in a good way? We cannot tell you what your elders will tell you or what they know. We can only confirm from many national conversations that their input and the value of their lived experience and the love they have for their nations not only exists, this love is also entirely genuine. We also know it's important to create a shift from what has been called a deficit model to a dependable model, dependable strengths model. The teachings of a proud history before the insult of contact and colonialism are stories your elders absolutely can share. The seniors in your communities have lived through incredible challenges and changes and can support the need for experience and encourage for forgiveness and coming together as a nation. They also have a very good sense about what reliance on a dependable strengths model will look like. They know how it is to live well. So I'm going to hand it over to Steve. I know we're running a little bit behind here, but I'm going to give him 10-15 minutes to talk, and then I'm just going to come back and finish this off very briefly. So I'll leave it to him to talk, and I'll get out of the way. And
okay, excuse me. I better get some, sorry. First of all, I want to acknowledge and thank you, Cynthia, for setting such a tough, tough act to follow. And before I even start, I want to acknowledge, Patricia, you sitting there, because when we're talking about education and development as Indigenous helpers or practitioner community workers, I really need to acknowledge the opportunity that you gave me in Cat Lake to be there and to be working during the Romeo Wesley inquest, where we learned so much about the impact of people moving back and forth between urban and reserve communities, the impact of the access. You know, in Northern Ontario, one of the things that I speak a lot about is that an area the size of France has basically unregulated alcohol. We're talking about trillion-dollar mining that we want to open up, but they can't regulate alcohol in whole jurisdictions of Northern Ontario. And so we as we talk about education in that, we need to be taking and giving our up and coming social workers and that access to those battles, those struggles. So I want to start with acknowledging you for giving me that chance. Okay, no, and you know, I work up in Saskatchewan and Fort Albany right now. So I'm working in the area where people are just coming to terms with the impact of the St. Anne's residential school, which some people are saying could be one of the worst in all of Canada. And you know, and now in Ontario, across Ontario, as we look for unmarked graves, we need to understand that even our elders, as we look to our elders, and what I'm finding in those northern communities, our elders are dealing with like my experience in education. In my 5th decade, I went back to school. I'm a lifelong learner, and I think that's where we excel in this lifelong learning journeys. And in my 5th decade, I did 2 masters. I did a master's of education at University of Toronto because they told me I wasn't smart enough to do a master's of social work. That they actually told me that they didn't think I would be able to complete the master's of social work at University of Toronto. So I did finish the master's of education. Every one of my papers got published after they told me that I wasn't smart enough even for theirs. But I also did a master's of social work at Laurier, at the Indigenous program, Kathy Absalon Smith program at Laurier. And in those processes, the work at University of Toronto led me to the concept of cultural safety, which I got a copy and I read. It was a nursing instructor from New Zealand, Arepidi Ramsden, and I would find myself weeping. I would be weeping reading her PhD thesis because she spoke to the experiences that we have navigating the education process, the health process, the justice processes, and her idea was that every Indigenous person, regardless of the role we take in our communities, we're also required and we're tasked with this idea of melancholic journeys of self-discovery. When we learn and we kind of get a context to the experience and of generations, it impacts our own lives and it impacts our ability to. I think for a lot of my career, I found myself very, very angry. And then, you know, we see that in our communities, in our families, there's a lot of anger. And one of the conversations I have with a lot of people, no, we need to be outraged. We need to be outraged because when we look at, you know, we're using words in my career, the words that have come up, you know, were like that were actually genocide, which is really the intent to destroy. There's some really good work with an author, his name's Colin Tatz out of Australia, who spoke about the Indigenous suicide and how it's all linked to the rates of suicide. I don't know if anybody out there who's listening knows Roland Christian, and I did get to read he was working on a book called Dying to Please, about how populations, when they're facing you know, basically destructive forces, that's you know, I think for me working for over 40 years in social work and a lot of the work around mental well-being and suicide, is we need to be looking at the whole concept of self-destructive high-risk behaviors. that put people in danger for accidental death or put them in a state of mind where they're facing existential crises, the wanting to die, so these are the topics that I think our generation. I'm this year I turned 68. And something that's really surfacing for me over this last few years is in the late 80s. I was at a conference for corrections workers. I was there, and Fred Wheatley was there. An elder, Fred Wheatley, was there, and one of the corrections officers said, we were Indians back then. In the 80s, we were still Indians. He said, one of the corrections workers said, "You Indians never tell us anything about yourselves." And Fred Wheatley stood up, and he was just gentle, but his face was red. So I thought he was going to express in anger, but in the gentle, kind way that a lot of elders approach those I call them insults, or their insults. He just said, "Listen," he said, we're just putting this all together ourselves." And I also remember being a children's aid worker in Regent Park in the early 80s. And Tom Harper, Vern Harper's brother, a group of Indigenous social workers, he was talking to us, and he said, "Listen," he said, "your generation, we're just trying to understand what happened to us." Going back to that conversation, it's not what's wrong with us, what happened to us. He said, "Your generation is going to find out what happened to us." And that to me is held true. It's true. And then I think now our challenge, and this is why the education and the blending like the sweetgrass, or weaving all these amazing Indigenous wisdom and knowledge. And my graduate work was so impacted by working with Lee Miracle. Lee Miracle, I've had I think a dozen papers published, and she has a footprint on all of those papers because of the ideas that we need to sort of work through. And so I guess the other thing I know trying to cover the material in my head, one of the things I want to mention because of my work in the North. So my work in the North started in 2004. All my work, my social work, was done from 1980 to 2004 in Southern Ontario. In 2004, I went to work for Nodin up in Sioux Lookout. It changed my whole orientation and my passion for social justice work. And the one thing that I want to leave as we talk about what education is going to mean, and how we share our experiences, our lived experiences, our work experiences. Because my work on cultural safety has led me to this whole concept of incivility in the workplace. So when we talk about lateral violence, because there's so much, I guess I would call it confusion. And in the workplace, we're challenging. We're always being challenged, whether it be from the Western way or I was recently working in that Ontario structured psychotherapy. And one of the hospital workers, the director of the program, when I said, your concept of delivering cognitive behavioral therapy needs to be indigenized. And the response was, well, maybe you guys are going to get your own money. And I say that because we're constantly in this jurisdictional, I call it like I was raised on a traveling carnival, so I call it like a jurisdictional funhouse, where who's responsible for the social development for Indigenous communities, Indigenous people. And I think it's in Ontario, it's a moral, I think it's unacceptable for a province to say that there's $1 trillion of resources in Northern Ontario and not take an interest in social development and spending some of that money to help train and prepare the workers. So my work in the North, and I really enjoyed that message from Australia. And it's true, when you see that those brutal, again, injustices, but you also see very, very talented, gifted helpers who need that mentoring and role modeling. And I think Reverend Ramsden was famous for a saying she had, was there's three types of people. There are people that make things happen, there are people that watch things happen, and there are people that never knew what hit them. So the people who watch things happen, just kind of, it's there and they just kind of, turn a blind eye to it or just disregard it. And the people who never knew what hit them are the people that a lot of us have been fighting for our lives, their careers. And so and she said she wanted her nurses to be people that make things happen. And I think that's what we need to prepare our next generation of helpers for, is how are we going to make things happen? And we are making things happen. So, again, and thank you for this opportunity. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know. I was waiting for the pull, waiting for the cane to come and pull me up. But again, Patricia, thank you for all you're doing, because I know that where your good mind and your good heart is.
Steve, you're very much welcomed. It's such an honor to have great people within our sessions to provide that further education and knowledge. It's very crucial to our First Nation education teams to hear the concepts out there. And again, we will carry on. Is everybody okay right now? Do we need a quick break? I'm doing a quick poll. I know everybody's got their cameras off. What do you think, Cynthia, or do you want to power through?
I think, well, we've got about a couple more minutes and then we'll open it up to Q&A.
Okay.
So,
we'll power through.
Sure, we might as well. We usually do.
Okay. All right.
So okay, so that was great. And thank you so much, Steve. All of the things that we're talking about, it doesn't mean that we stop holding external agencies and governments accountable to our people. We have to still hold them accountable, which is why I wanted you to see that, start that video, because those people, there are people in those places that can be of assistance to us, but that's all. We want to do the work ourselves, because our first task is to ensure that we're doing and implementing our work, our ideas, and framing and implementing our jurisdictions and authorities. So those are really important things to really take into consideration. No one's coming to save us or to make things right. That's our responsibility. And I think that those are really important words as I move through this, this past 40 years doing this work, is those words like discipline, which of course ceremony brings and prayer brings, and this question of responsibility, that we needed to have that locus of control return to our community so that we actually took that seriously. And we didn't do so much breaking apart, so that there's this separation of people, separation of kids from elders, separation of partners, lots of separate marriages breaking down, the domestic violence, like all those things. Like we need to pull all that back together, encourage all of our adults in all of our communities and all of our elders to be part of this new dynamic. We need to really find ways and really talk that up and really think that that's the way it is, because thinking about that's the way it is the way to bring it back, restoring that kind of discipline and interaction that made it possible for everybody in our histories to survive for millennia without, the government helping them. That was just the wisdom of the elders that kept people alive. So I want to share a chart with you to have a look at in terms of some of the planning that is possible here. Let's see, where was I? Let me just share this and I'll go forward a couple charts here. I wanted to share this chart with you. Again, just a little bit about the possibilities of learning and using things. And this comes from a mental health wellness strategy. But again, it's a thing that's, I've been sort of talking about as we've been moving forward, community-wide data collection, not just a few people or a few key people that are being paid to do this work, but everybody in the community, and creating some kind of an advisory circle so that people understand that they're a part of this conversation. I know we don't really like community surveys, but just getting people engaged and asking them, what do you want? Where do you want to be, as we move forward, and getting those lived experiences, interviews done with people and talking to people and service providers and what are we doing? And then identifying and synthesizing all that information and really having a good look at what does it all say to us, those, and letting people come together over tea, over a feast, just to talk about what did we find out in phase one and what are we going to do about it? What's the priority for us as a community? What's most important? And I learned this through the self-government work that we did many years ago, that we didn't do it right. We sort of said, let's get rid of everything and start anew, when in fact, what we should have been doing is looking at what is the strength in your community and let's build that. Let's start there. And if you already have great relations with your elders and your youth, then you have a healthier community than those people that are now experiencing a lot of youth suicide and a lot of challenges. And then we want to talk about implementation, that, action research, implementing that strategy, establishing teams, that people that are going to work together, like asset mapping, who is in your community that's going to be a part of this conversation, and then designing and implementing a strategy for the community. And I got asked about a strategy at the COO health conference. One of the guys said, one of the health directors said, I got 80% of my community members are addicted to opioids, 80%. I need a strategy. And I said, well, I just gave you a strategy. The strategy is that you need to talk to each other. You need to engage everybody in the community in this conversation. Nothing from external forces is going to make it right. It's got to be done internally. The strategy is that you lift your youth, you talk to your children before they have children of their own. You reformulate your relationships with your partners to strengthen them. That's the strategy. Is family is going to make it work. And then phase 4, sharing that knowledge and strategies, tools, recommendations, and actually doing something in the community that everybody has a part, plays a role and has a piece of, so that it can actually be done. So those are really important considerations, I know, but those are the ways that we're going to be able to do it, because we don't really have any other way. It's our children that are counting on us to build healthy communities. They want relevant education systems to meet their needs and to build their futures and ensure they're free of trauma, both the intergenerational impacts that we're all very much aware of today, and contemporary ones as well, because we are all living in a very difficult time with extreme weather events and incivility, and a lot of the pieces that are happening, things are breaking down. But if they're breaking down, it's an opportunity for us to build them up in the ways that we actually want them. We want to congratulate parents, grandparents who've worked at cycle breaking over the last couple generations. I know that Jeanette's work was very much part of that. Jeanette has been, we've all been very strongly oriented to how do we break those horrible cycles that we grew up with and do a much better job with our own children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, so that they don't have to have those experiences. Extending our love and care to those who are struggling with grief, trauma, and supporting their healing. We've done a lot of healing across the course of time, and I think we need to be proud of that fact. And again, people like Elder Jeanette have been part of that conversation and have been teaching for many, many, many years and helping people understand that. So to generate a strong education system that gives every child a gift of learning and success, no matter what direction they choose, we need to create a circle of support that includes everybody in every place in every community. So that's an important part of this conversation. So I want to leave it there. And thank you for your patience. I know we went over a little bit today. It was a bit longer. I wasn't really sure how long it was going to be, but maybe we can move to some of the questions that people might have, or comments. So I don't see any questions.
Yeah, it's just mainly comments. A comment identifying, the exceptional people, and they wanted to know Steve Kopke's name, and
Thank you.
yeah, and identifying, the asset strategy focus, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's probably one of the most important things we can do is asset map our communities. You have more people in your communities than you're aware of. And maybe, if there's not a lot of questions, maybe Jeanette, you'd be happy to share some of your thoughts and, and some of the work that you might have done if you have any interest. We have about half an hour. You don't have to.
membership. First Nation women's membership. Oh,
Yeah.
So just before she begins, there is a question about who should be starting the conversation in the community. I think in terms of starting that conversation, the best people to start the conversation are people that are actively engaged in the conversation already and have a better sense of what kinds of things are needed. But I think if you went directly to the elders in your community, even the reluctant ones, and start the conversation there, that would be a really important thing to do. And then you know you have your church, you have your youth centers, you have a lot going on in your community. It just gently start having conversation in each of those places to see what the priorities would be. And I'll leave it there, and I'll hand it over to Jeanette.
Well, miigwech, and yeah, I guess I appreciate all the information that you're sharing with how we should be working together and reaching out to our elders and all the resources in our communities. And it is still there. Thank the Creator for that. And even though it has been difficult, I've been noticing lately that people are more open. The elders especially, and young people, I believe, are beginning to realize that they can reach out and talk to some of their teachers and their relatives and their aunties if they have some difficulties that they're going through right now. And I've been retired now from teaching at our high school in Wikwemcong for 15 years now, and but I'm still part of that system, and I still have young people coming to me. And I guess when we talk about the role of elders, it's you can't identify yourself and say, well, I'm an elder, this is what I can do, but not. That's not what an elder is. Elders are people who, like you pointed out, are recognized for their experience, what they've done, and what they can share with others if they're willing to share it. And it has to be given to you. And it is done with good intention, good meaning. And we see that, and that is what would make us strong. When I look back and I think about my own upbringing, well, there were a lot of relatives, and the women in my family were quite strong, and they were energetic. And I learned so much just from being in their presence, whether it was quilting or cooking or doing something. And not too long ago, I shared with others that the whole revival of our culture, when we talk about culture, this is now when we think about it, like bringing that powwow back and that singing and dancing and really searching back into our history about what we did within our ceremonies. That all started with the women in our communities, much to the opposition of many people. But nonetheless, here we are, 54 years later, and it's still there, bigger and better. And the true essence of what those social gatherings, powwows, are is recognized now. And we have all ages there in the communities, and it involves everything. It involves the sharing of stories, it involves food and sustenance, and we have the medicines there, and we have workshops, and also just the entertainment. So that is there, and we just need to I guess recognize and share it, and show that respect to those movers. You said that there are three kinds of people: the ones who take action. Well, if we can encourage the ones who are out there taking that action and be supportive. In my own struggle, when I wanted to assert and challenge the Indian Act, of which wouldn't recognize us as women within our communities. I didn't think it was going to be that big a deal. I thought, well, we all acknowledge that. Why are we losing our women? Why are we losing our people? Because it also involved men and others and people who were intelligent, going to universities, or they were academics. Well, I already said that, but you know, there were so many exclusions. But that was the genocide aspect of the government under, you know, the early government officials who didn't want to see very many of us. And we were just mentioning earlier about putting us on those reserves, those little tracts of land. In our language, those little tracts of land are called shkodagatne. And in our language, shkodagat is something that's left behind. So that's all we were given. But that shows you the attitude of the government officials at the time, starting right from McDonald and Duncan Campbell Scott, and all that, a piece of genocide. Thank goodness, I think the Pope recognized that, and he did mention that. And, but all these outside forces. So what I'm experiencing now is that as Anishinaabe people and as other First Nations within our communities and right across Canada, Haudenosaunee out west, the Sioux, the Cree, all those other nations, we are coming together and we're stronger because we're recognizing we can look at the truth, the history, and see what our people have gone through. And also recognizing that our people, our elders, our leadership had those value qualities. They really represented the voices of their people. They didn't go out there on their own ego trip. They were there speaking for their people, their nations. And this is what we must do now, is look at our communities, hear our people, all ages. And that's what we need to come together on and work on. Then we can act as a true nation. So, you know, when I started this court case, it was so difficult to get our voices heard as Indigenous women. We were barred, we weren't allowed to speak. Thank goodness that's changed now, but it's taken 50 years and it's still not complete, but we are still working on it. And when I think about the learning system or the education system, I think the other guest there, speaker, talked about going back, you know, when he was older at 50. This is what our people have always done. We should always be open to learning new ways of doing things, getting more information, more knowledge. And I'm at that stage in my life where I want to learn more about our medicines, about healing, and use those medicines that the women in my family had. I know they were there, but didn't pay much attention maybe. But now I realize the importance, and it's still there. So now I'm talking to some of the other women, not only in Wickham, but in other communities, and saying, what did we do for this, for arthritis, or for other illnesses that are becoming more and more evident within our communities? And to get back to that good way of living, that good Anishinaabe Agwin, which is a way of living as a Anishinaabe. And it's, I'm encouraged. And after your presentation and hearing, if we can get that concept out to our educators and say, each child, each learner within our space, you know, the ones we're responsible for, if we can encourage them to be the best and encourage them to look at their skills, encourage them to be proud and have that respect for their sense of identity, that sense of belonging, and that they are unique. I think that's the best thing we can do within our environments. And it doesn't matter how old we are. Start with the babies. We have nursery schools. They can learn the language there, and that sense of unconditional love. But I'm pleased to be part of this. Miigwech, Patricia, for inviting me. I just happened to be here at this gathering, and nice to see you. And your words are very strong, very powerful, and I hope we can just keep moving forward and working together for the strength and the I guess, be strong nations, Anishinaabe Nation. Miigwech.
Oh,
Thank you so much. Yeah, Steve wanted to add a couple words here. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Jeanette, thank you for that. I wanted to, you just reminded me of my work in going through Arepide Ramsden's PhD thesis, because what she said is, and what we just experienced, she called those topical autobiographic narratives. And then when we tell them, that's a very important knowledge sharing. And one of the things that I came from that, and the other part of your story that represented it, and my research led me to this whole idea, and it comes from the civil rights and the Vietnam anti-war movement, and they called it surplus powerlessness. Colonial, if we were talking about decolonizing our everything, every aspect of our lives, that's the first step, is understanding, you know, when we talk about, and that's what's happening. So the rest of the country, Canada, and then we have a global role too, as we're becoming empowered, as we speak about those injustices, and as we see what's happening. So I didn't really introduce myself. My territory is 6 nations. I'm Tuscaroran and Ukrainian. So when I look at what's happening in Ukraine, Indigenous people will have a lot in Canada, will have a lot to offer about reconciliation, about this whole idea that you can destroy property and people to assert your jurisdiction. I think we have a lot to contribute in the aftermath, or how we're ever going to resolve that. And so I think, again, that the learning and that we are putting in place the processes and developing because I think everything is so focused on process and not relationship. So thank you for reminding me of Ramsden's work. So now go.
Steve. And good to know where your background is.
Yeah.
My son was over in the Ukraine. He works for the UN, so he was there for several months. But that's a whole nother story. but we do hear about what's happening in the Ukraine.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I just was looking at the chat. We're just having a little bit of a conversation in here, but there's lots of things that are going on, and people just asking, you know, what can I do about making the changes? Is there a place for non-Indigenous people in this conversation? And I would say, absolutely there is. I mean, you know, nobody's going anywhere. We're all in this, you know, living here together, and we've been living here for a long time. There's a lot of intermarriage in our communities. I mean, that was what Jeanette was fighting about, the fact that she should be removed from her community simply because she loved somebody that wasn't Indigenous. I mean, that's not even reasonable to have that kind of thing happen. And our grandchildren are also affected by that, including mine. So, you know, I understand that. But yes, there's a place for non-Indigenous peoples to be a part of this conversation. And you know, when you're in a school, that's the perfect place to begin the conversation. And it's, you know, it's been pointed out that we're actually using different models to make sure that our kids are thriving, eliminated special education teachers and removing children from their classroom, you know, that those kids deserve and have a right to be learning in the same classrooms as everybody else, and their needs respected. because it, I mean, I guess that's also part of this conversation about going back to the elders in our communities who recognize that there are differences in everyone, and hallelujah for that. Like, that's a good thing, that we have peacekeepers and we have those people who lead, and those people who have spiritual inclination. I mean, all of those people are important. I want to tell you a story. When I was up in a remote community, I had a young fellow that was in my classroom who was a special education student. And he came to me because I let them stay in the classroom. I said, if you want to stay in the classroom, you have every right to be here. If you cannot behave, or you do, I'll send you down there. And all I had to do was look at them and they would stay. But anyway, he came to me and said, if I leave the classroom and go to my trap line, can I come back? Is that okay? And I said, absolutely. And so he went and did his traps and came back. He was the kid in the community that fed the elders. He spoke the language fluently. He was being raised by his grandparents. And I said to the chief in the community, I think you should take this young man out of school, because he really struggles with that academic curriculum, and give him to the elders in your community and let them teach him everything they know. And then when all of the other students are coming back from the south, where they've gone to school and Sioux Lookout, this young man is going to be holding the culture for them. And he will be the elders coming up, the elder in training. There are other young people in the community. And because the other thing that I was afraid of is in many remote communities, they are overly familiar with suicide. And I said, I'm afraid for this young man that if he struggles that hard, that he may decide he doesn't want to be here anymore at all. So give him to the elders, let them teach him, and let him live in the way that he is most comfortable and appropriate. And I will bet, and I'm sure Jeanette, there must be many children in our communities that are like that. The academic thing, math, reading, writing, arithmetic is not for them.
Absolutely. The other aspect that's happening now is when you're talking about that young man, is we're using the land-based teaching approach.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, my son is doing that in our system at the high school in Wequemco. And children just love going to those classes based on the land.
Mm-hmm.
And they are learning language, they're learning science, they're learning about animals, they're learning about the environment, trees, waters. It's all inclusive, and it's so obvious, like that young man you're talking about, given credit for having all that knowledge. And this is what we're trying to do within our systems now. If they're struggling, they have that opportunity and they can excel, practice those skills,
Mm-hmm.
And we're needing more and more of that, when, especially now with the environment and what's happening in all the pollutants and, the development, those big corporations coming in, just clear cut it's, and if we have our young people to have that knowledge, so much better, and they will feel good about themselves, and they won't be thinking about not participating. That's so heartbreaking when some child reaches that point they have to give up.
Yeah.
Because that potential's there. So it's we're encouraging land-based teaching along inclusive with the other curriculum, and we can all learn that.
Right. I think Six Nations has also got a school. I think Six Nations also has a school that does I think it said, I was reading an article that said they only come in for lunch. And otherwise they're outside, because that's where the science is. That's where the math is. That's where the learning about the land is. It's all out. It's already out there. I mean, we didn't have to sit in row and row in schools before. So I think that's a really important, yeah. Oh, so also another comment about the land-based learning model is a really important one, but it's, this is somebody that's in the Western system, and they said it's difficult including the land-based learning model with staff who only know the Western model. They don't know how to image it. They don't know how to plan it. They don't know how to report on it. And it's hard for them. So, I always recommend that people
lifelong learning. They can learn.
They can
And
learn.
they can
Yeah.
learn our people.
I think so. And Teach for Canada has made a real strong effort to get teachers in. We recruit teachers for northern communities that have they're flexible. They like to go outside, right? They have the skill sets that are going to be imperative for them to be able to learn how to do land-based learning. And they know how to pluck a duck. They learn all of that, right? That's, we had used to pluck offs.
If I can add something.
Sure. Oh, sorry, your hand blends into your color.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm very fortunate to be able to be a Cree culture, language and culture teacher. And I'm not really, I don't have, a degree in teaching at all, but very important, all of the things that you said, it's about reaching out to the community. So you don't have to be knowledgeable about the land. You bring the land to the classroom, and you can also bring them to the land through your friendship centers, because we can't forget the urban people. We can't forget, like we have some schools, some communities that don't have school. So what I'm in Cochrane, Ontario. So we have all the ones from James Bay that come and live here to be able to get to go to school, to secondary school. So I initiated the help of the elders in the community. And again, everything that you named was a very great extensive list of the elders that we can bring, and those that even the grandmothers and grandfathers, even though they're not elders, they do have those things, and engaging the youth and bringing the youth and the elders together, because they are on the opposite side of that medicine wheel. And it's been fantabulous. Like the board here is really great, and I think that that's one of the things that could be worked on for urban areas, is to have the school board on board to bring those elders and have honorariums and gifts for them when they do come in. So miigwech for listening.
Miigwech. Yeah.
Thank you. So true. And it actually gives hope to people that are listening and will be watching this, that there's a way, right? Those conversations can happen. Part of that is also, I take that responsibility very, very seriously of helping other people learn and teach.
And I also did a lot of the first month or so, a lot about identity. And I also am mindful that the churches have been influenced, but I also, and be respectful about that, because that's where they are. And we have to be respectful, but also teaching them that you can navigate both, because culture and tradition are different for different people, and knowing what the students want in the classroom as well. And that's what I do. I get them to tell me what they would like to learn, and having a balance of both, and just telling him this is a worldview, this is a worldview. I'm not teaching you this. I'm a teacher. I'm not telling you that this is the end all of end alls. It's like, this is something that you can learn about. You can take it or you can leave it. And it's important for you to still, your beliefs are your beliefs. Who am I? Right. So it works really well. Miigwech.
Just on that as well, when we're looking at our communities and our educational institutions and our students who are having difficulty, we had, I think 2 years ago, a group of students who just were finding some of those subjects difficult. And so they came together, regular credit course, and they built a cedar strip canoe right in the school. And it was 26 feet long, I think. And it took a whole term, eh? And those boys and girls felt so good that they were able to do it right from scratch. That big canoe is still there in our community still used, and nice bright red. And they took it out on the when it was launched in the spring, and they all went out and they paddled around the bay there at Prairie Point, and you could just see they were just almost walking on air. How good they felt, but with that accomplishment. So we can do that with our, but they're learning everything. They're learning carpentry, they're learning measurement, they're learning about gluing and cutting. Well, everything that encompasses. So it doesn't only have to be in a math class. You're taking the math out there and you're looking at the environment. You know, is it a good day to go out on the water? What about our paddles? You know, what kind of wood are we going to use to make that? So it is doable, I guess, and that's what we're looking at today, is looking at curriculum.
Can I, yeah. Sorry, I just want to add, you just again reminded me of an experience. I was teaching at Confederation College in Thunder Bay, and I was teaching decolonized community worker. Where I think everything we do now is called decolonize something. So, but I had the students, I gave them a copy of the a United Nations conversation on rescinding the doctrine of discovery. And I asked them to read it and then come back to have a conversation in the next class. And it was what an amazing experience, because they all shared that when they sat with their families, they sat with their parents, they sat with their grandparents, and when they understood the meaning or the implications of that doctrine of discovery on our historic experience, they were all surprised. And I think, you know, again, the whole idea of curriculum, that's a big part of the role and responsibility we have, is developing those curriculums. So thank you again. Sorry, Cynthia.
Found out about the doctrine of discovery myself not too long ago.
Yeah.
When the Pope rescinded.
The Pope has rescinded it, but the question I think people are asking is the same as when he was traveling here, and he said it took him listening to the elders speaking before he was able to say the things that needed to be said.
Yeah.
And somebody was complaining about it, and I said, he's the Pope. He doesn't write his own speech.
That's
But when he listened to the elders as he moved forward, he started to talk about sexual abuse, and he started to talk about, well, he talked about genocide when he was actually flying away. But he thought about the things that he heard as he was traveling across. And I think that really had a profound effect on him, hearing their voices. And then he thought about the doctrine of discovery and how it had been abused. You know, I think that the original intent, you know, how law does things. So we're still at a place now where people are saying, well, what is the action that will be taken from this? Canada has been quite silent, you'll notice.
true.
They have not said anything about that. So they're quite silent on it. So I'm waiting to see if they're going to actually have anything to say about what the action will be and what kinds of resources will go to it. Hey, Amos, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I was just going to add to this conversation. We have to remember that the Pope only repudiated the doctrines. He did not rescind it. Only the church can rescind.
Yeah,
and
true enough.
So we still have to get him to rescind it. I said he should have actually got a copy of the Doctrines of Discovery and burned it in one of his urns, right?
Yeah. Yes. Like, well,
But
then
we're visual people. We're visual people. He should have done that. Burned the Doctrines of Discovery, a photocopy of it even.
yes. And then we'll put our status cards in after.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So he only repudiated, he didn't rescind it yet.
Okay.
That's
So maybe Canada's job is to rescind it then.
yes.
Maybe that's what's going to have to happen. So it's been very silent. So we're waiting to see what happens. Yeah, there's a lot going on. Some backtracking on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. You know, we're fighting to have that recognized. The Ring of Fire in Ontario that is going forward, whether we like it or not. Right. So we're not out of the woods yet. That's why I said, like, we have to do a lot of work ourselves, but it doesn't mean we let the government off with the stuff that is really important from their side of things. And I know they don't like that, but and let me also say before we close, I'm also concerned though, if we change governments, that's going to be even more difficult.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Because a conservative government will not, we've come quite a ways, and we need some locking in to happen over the next little while too, of some of the things that have changed. Because it's easy for a government to say, well, that was then and this is now, and we're not going to honor that. So we are still in a very precarious place, but we've done good work, and I want to leave it at that. Pat, if there's anything else you want to add before we close, and please go ahead. I don't think there's any other questions.
Yeah, there's a request for a link to the TED speaker.
Okay.
And there's also another suggestion. We should have a conference to share the lesson planning and assignments that bring land to the classroom with technology. Students can learn about it too. Okay. And that's all yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that next week. So I'll make a note of that.
That's right.
Yeah. I'll include what I can from people that are actually doing that work.
That's right. That's right. So it's roughly 11:48. Do we have any final, questions, comments from the floor? All right. So, that brings us to our conclusion. So I just wanted to, wrap up everything, provide an opportunity to our elder Amos Keys to do a closing. And thank goodness I have a team of elders. I will always say this. I am so honored and so humbled. When you're in the presence of elders, it just gives you such a spirit of confidence, and you'll notice in my opening, I didn't stutter. I didn't, I wasn't shaking, and maybe that's for that. The power of who we are is just quite amazing, and I'm again very honored. So I would like to, wrap it up by saying, supporting our learners, the cultural quantum, the community-wide knowledge exchange, indigenizing education, land-based grocery store, my goodness, the language, the rename, reframe Indigenous learning, the discipline, the restoring, the learn, identify, implement, share, right? To building the strength, to reformulate the relationships that we have, to generate and to generate a strong education system, and we can go on, and yes, we should create that learning space, that strong learning space. And I'm again very, very honored, and I'm really excited for the next session. So friendly reminder, we've got another session in May. I look forward to that again, and I will hand it over to Amos. Miigwech, Amos.
Oh no. Scanos for Guego. Tai home was Niguasquiaso, Nanto home, Guayho Date, University of Toronto, what Nishore. The nation home, good quite in Yegan Windsor 6 Nations of the Grand River. Native Son home, Gayan Kyono, you walk shout down. Nani Ganyak down, you walk shout down. Good afternoon, good morning, I guess still, to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to help close this meeting today. I'm at the University of Toronto, looking down Spadina right now, up my window. And I just wanted to say I'm a Mohawk. I gave you my first name. My traditional name is Dehai Ho'omas, and it translates, he works with words. And I'm from the Mohawk Nation. I said that as well in my language. And also I'm from the Turtle Clan of my mother. So I just wanted to greet everybody with my language first, as per our protocols, and then send everyone home or away with some good feelings of what we learned this morning, what we talked about. As I said, I couldn't join you all right from the beginning. So I'm going to close the meeting in my language. It's Kayoko no. That's the language of where I live. So I'll do it at our Thanksgiving address, and it talks about all of our bounty and our love, and it talks about all the gifts of the Creator from our Genesis as a Haudenosaunee civilization, right from the Genesis to giving thanks for our daily lives, for all the gifts, the beautiful sunlight we have here today, our grandmother, the moon, who brings our young people, our babies forward and controls the water on Mother Earth. So we give thanks for all of those sacred medicines that surround us. And as I delve more into the other civilizations in this province, the Anishinaabe and the Muskego civilizations, I find there are a lot of similarities in our gifts and how we acknowledge it. So I'm going to do it in my language, and just ask you to take a few moments and to reflect in your own language of the gifts that you have. And I'll start right now in my language. Dogaski ayan he ngot kaunyo ngot kasungo ni na ngot taunyo sanidwa no dan sanidwa ho dan e jungwe howe gagondi go sanyo ngot ngwai hwans gagon handwai ho kanto ni na to santo kai wati go no nyo ni di always sat scanner to na tonyo ni di hindwe he iha skat and wai go ni go skat that what no nyo na again your tongue ngwa ni go sum. And Darren Dwa Troy Hondoy Hodonyo Tat Snagasa, Nahavian hate, Nady Higwigan did you know honyo, yet again your tongue, on Guadney go on so. And Darren Dwa Troy Hodonyo Hodonyo, Tat Snagasa, Nahamayan hate, Nady Higwigan did you know honyo, yet again your tongue, on Guadney go home. And Darren Dwa Troy gain you with doggy Hadokia Kuno, Nady Hidongis Nanto Wednesday, Nady Higwigan did you know honyo, gain you with doggy Hadokia Kuno. The Yonki and your don't it again, your tongue from Guani go on so. Hand down and draw true, say to go on your scanner dayo, or who wanna taught what's out in the scanner, he went shredding yongi. Needing he great than horn, say to go on your scanner dayo, need to get your tongue from Guani go on so. And down and draw true, how get to know some quiet so. Nate son to santo, scanner I do not on you. Needing he great than horn, you. How get to know some quiet so. You get your tongue from Guadney go on so. Then down and 20 God, Queen Ike had got to Kanahano, agree Juaniki, those the song he sang, seeing it, gain you with dog had to hear, send home what's squatting on it now with me, Shrinis. Donito. So at the end, I asked that our best words go to the Creator for us today and for our families and our communities. And I just mentioned, in my civilization and the philosophy and of our civilization, the Haudenosaunee, we have these four spirits that are around us at all times, and they guide us throughout the day, throughout the evening, through our sleep, to take care of us and our families. So I just ask those four spirits to take us, grab our hands and take us home carefully to our loved ones and to our next rest of our day. So we thank those four spirits. We call them in our language. So that's how I'll end the day. And so God bless everybody. Love you all.
Thank you, Amos. And thank you, Jeanette and Patricia. Thank you so much for everything that you offered up today. It was very much appreciated. You guys take care. We'll see you see you in May.
Happy to watch.
Bye.